The Marvel Cinematic Universe is never-ending, seemingly, and now it's desperately stricken by the law of diminishing returns. Marvel's flagship character is, of course, the red and blue arachnid fancier himself that you're currently seeing strutting across the screen. Yes, Spider-Man. But he came into that particular movie series pretty late, thanks to a series of complicated rights issues between Disney and Sony. But we weren't short of screen tellings of the web swinger's history despite this, before even Tom Holland's cockney charm and winning youthful smile lit up the screen just prior to the culmination of the Infinity War saga. We had already had Messrs Garfield and Maguire since the turn of the millennium on the silver screen, and countless animated escapades, along with a rather poorly aged pair of live television series from the 70s from either side of the Atlantic. But my favourite version of Spider-Man, including the comic, was always the Fox TV mid-1990s version. You know, the one. Peter Parker looked a bit weird with his side parting, and, well, he wore a polo shirt that wouldn't look out of place on a middle-aged dad day drinker in a flat-roof pub, but only in the summer and only when that young barmaid's in. She wants it, doesn't she? Spider-Man ran from 1994 until 1998, first swinging onto the screens on, and I'm going to say this carefully, Fox Kids in the States, while in the UK we had to sit through Saturday morning light entertainment in the form of Live and Kicking to get our Spider goods for the week. Bog off, Let Loose. Stop singing. I want to see carnage chop people up. Spider-Man was given the green light after the success of fellow Marvel stablemate the X-Men had got on to tremendous success, along with DC's Batman animated series, which was also very good, wasn't it? Yes, it was. The plotline was like a kinetic greatest hits of Spider-Man's 30 years worth of adventures up to that point, introducing every major villain and anti-hero in Spider-Man's pantheon of tales, along with giving all of the major plot lines breathlessly truncated versions, sometimes trying to fit them into 21 minutes of episodic action, but then occasionally realising that wasn't possible and spanning the story over multiple episodes. Interestingly enough, current plotline du jour, that being the multiverse, and more specifically the Spider-Verse, had its screen debut in this series, meaning kids in the 90s were confusingly rotating their heads like baffled dogs about all this multi-dimensional hogwash back then too. Spider-Man was restricted with what it could do thanks to the censorship of the time. Police were armed with lasers instead of pistols. Vampires like Morbius and Blade had to absorb plasma instead of drink blood. And not once did Peter punch a fella in the face, and nor did he hoof him through some breakable glass. He just wasn't allowed. It's true. Go back and watch all 65 episodes. You will not see him punch anyone at all. Incredibly, they couldn't even use the word sinister to describe the Sinister Six. What harm is there in using the word sinister? Does it cause heart attacks in the elderly? Does it? Hang on, I'll test this out. I'll be right back. Yes, it does. Weird, eh? Despite this cripplingly over-the-top nannying, it was appointment telly for comic nerds and had a banger of a theme tune, although not quite as catchy as the X-Men theme. That was really top quality theme writing, that X-Men theme. So yes, as I said, it lasted 65 episodes, but it wasn't cancelled. It merely ran its course according to producer John Semper Jr. and had a cast that included Mark Hamill, Hank Azaria, Ed Asner, David Warner, Jim Cummings and Jennifer Hale. Plus, in the last series, the mysteriously enigmatic multi-dimensional being, Madam Web, appeared, and she was voiced by Stan's wife, Joan Lee, which is kind of nice and fitting, isn't it? Given the show's success, it should come as no surprise that it had a late-stage 16-bit adaptation on the Super Nintendo and the Megadrive, courtesy of Acclaim, in 1994. It was Spidey's last game by Acclaim and they've been pumping them out until that point. We wouldn't see another one for 5 years when Activision took up the reins. While essentially very similar in terms of plotline and structure, the Super Nintendo and Megadrive games were actually a little bit different when it comes to gameplay and level design. The plotline is fairly simple. Spider-Man's enemies have escaped jail and have decided to club together and give old Webhead all manner of hassle. A who's who of arseholes are after Peter, those being Doc Ock, Shocker, Green Goblin, Mysterio, Venom, Rhino, Lizard, Jack-O-Lantern, the Tinkerer, the Owl, the Beetle, and Alistair Smythe, the owner and wearer of the most magnificent mullet in Marvel history. That's a real Michael Bolton, and I love the flat top. Now, it may sound like a tall order for Spidey to take on these fellas, yes, even the Owl, all at once, but that is exactly what he must do across 6 levels of side-scrolling platform action. Obviously, these evil swine have all manner of evil goons and gadgets at their disposal, so Arachnofella will definitely do over 10k steps on his Apple Watch today, I can tell you that for nothing. Luckily, he's not totally alone, as on occasion members of the Fantastic Four can be called upon as sort of power-ups to offer some much needed support. A measure of how post-2000 era Spider-Man games are generally how fluidly Spider-Man you feel while playing them. The PlayStation 2018 game and the game based on Tobey Maguire's Spider-Man 2 are good examples of how good it is when you're as agile and lithe as the high-kicking Spider-Fella, and well, that's not on display here in either version. Yes, these systems are obviously multiple generations advanced on the crusty old 16-bit consoles that we're using here, so they're obviously going to be a little bit more limited technically, but Spider-Man is decidedly lethargic in Spider-Man the Animated Series, not really up for doing whatever a spider can. The levels are small, compact corridors with a bit of verticality, and so Spider-Man spends most of his time jogging slowly about, doing unathletic kicks and punches for the most part, and rarely using his web shooters, which seem a little bit ineffective anyway. There is a bit of web swinging, but it's not intuitive at all and can only be used sparingly. The way he controls is pretty similar to those 2 comic-derived scrolling beat-em-ups Maximum Carnage and Separation Anxiety, but the genre they were in sort of demands that Spider-Man is a bit more confined to the ground, but in those he at least has a little speed in his general assaults on the goons that were in front of him. Sega's Spider-Man vs. the Kingpin, a platformer released half a decade before this, featured a far more energetic Spider-Man climbing and swinging hither and dither to all manner of surfaces, and so should be viewed as a more apt comparison. And well, in that instance, Spider-Man the Animated Series is a bit miserable. This is one basic bitch to play. Level design isn't brilliant either, sometimes very frustrating to steer about due to how they are laid out. It's not always obvious what walls Spidey can stick to, or even what he can just simply stand on, and there are doorways and trapdoors that are easy to miss. Similarly, the web swinging can only be done on certain surfaces, meaning you'll often be baffled on what to do next using a character not normally thwarted by obstacles at all. You should just be able to climb or swing right over them, right? This is something Spider-Man vs. Kingpin didn't suffer from, and that's why that game is the best Spider-Man game of this era. Despite this, if you separate the character of Spider-Man from the game itself, if you were to say just be controlling a generic fella, or even Captain America say, I think it would improve the experience. I don't think it would be a brilliant platform game, but it would be passable. It's just not a good Spider-Man game. It's a challenge to get through it, not just because of the poor level design, but because it's a long and tough game, and so you'll get a good workout from it. And you know what? I've got a real soft spot for the after-game summations of the characters' later activities, as they are pretty funny. I mean, Rhino gets violated by a real rhino in a zoo, something you probably wouldn't have seen in the Saturday morning cartoon. Graphically, it's perfectly fine. The representations of the villains are instantly recognisable. However, old Parker himself looks a little bit short and dumpy, if we're being honest, in the Super Nintendo game. The levels are okay, I guess. The first level is a pretty bland mechanical factory or whatever it's supposed to be, but it does improve later on. Mysterio's level is in a theme park, and well, that's quite an interesting thing to move about in. So the games are slightly different from each other, and if I was to pick my favourite from the two, it's probably going to be the Megadrive one, with its 3 buttons being a bit more contextual than the finger-twisting Super Nintendo version, and the levels themselves are a bit more compact and direct in the Megadrive one. It's showing less ambition, but it's doing it better. It also runs ever so slightly smoother, so mark this as a win for Sega today. As the Spider-Man game of the era, it is better than Arcade's Revenge for sure, but it's no Spider-Man versus the Kingpin. It's not an amazing Spider-Man, it's not a spectacular Spider-Man. It's probably the middling Spider-Man. I won't say go out of your way to play it, but I won't say don't play it. It's fine, it's an average game. GamePro reviewed both games in the same issue. The Mega Drive version got a 3.5 out of 5. They said Spider fans and action adventure fans will agree. You can't keep a good spider down. They gave the Super Nintendo game the exact same score of 3.5 and said this game could be a good way to spend time between issues. Next time out, shall we have a goosey gander at another cartoon? Well, how about one about a rather regal elephant? Yes, we're going to be playing Bar on the Game Boy Advance. But until that time, Excelsior, as Stan Lee would say, and like, subscribe, and K thanks, bye.